This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah. Okay. And present.
All right, guys. Thank you guys all for being here today. My name is Freddie Gonzalez, and today I'm presenting what I call the Ovranos project. Give you a brief description. This is the forecast, what you guys will be looking at today. We're going to start off with the problem. We're going to start off with the target audience, the circumstance in which you'd use the product I've developed, the solution to the problem, the timeline in which I worked out this problem, the project itself, the architecture, my difficulties, and then we'll have room for questions. Any questions? No? All right, cool. So the problem. Now, finding the right music for video advertisements can be a hassle due to copyright laws. Getting music for your video costs a lot of money. So that's the problem I address in this project. The target audience that we're going after here are new business owners who want to make their own video ads, that is through either Facebook, LinkedIn, or other social media platforms, freelance folk who want to make their own video ads as well, starting advertising agencies who make video ads. So essentially these are for smaller businesses, people with limited income, and a service that can supply music for their soon-to-be videos. So the circumstance in which they would use this product. So to put the scenario like this, business owner hears a jingle he or she likes. He or she wonders, wow, that would sound good for my ad, but I bet there's a copyright to that song, right? So I mean, right? So you can want to use like a big song, for example, like a Lionel Richie song for an advertisement, but you run a lot of risk by doing that. Even if your company doesn't get a lot of publicity, it's still a risk. And so the solution to that problem is to use the Ovranos project, a web application that takes your favorite songs and transmutes them into usable formats that do not infringe on the copyright. Now you can use the music for your advertisement without legal worries.
So what is transmutation?
Change. Okay. It's change.
So you're gonna morph whatever you hear.
That's right. Because once it's transformed, once it's changed, and it's not the same thing anymore, and therefore, just to use this term in that sense, it gets rid of the legal worry of it, right? Because if it's changed, then it's different, and it's not the same. So your legal worries are done in that regard.
Got it. But you need to start from a sample to generate your transmutation.
That's the case. Okay. That's the case. So, and I'm going to get into the functionality of how it actually all comes together. But first, I wanted to cover the timeline. So, this was a 3-week ordeal. First week was research on the tools I would use, which includes Amazon, AWS, as well as TensorFlow and Magenta. TensorFlow, Magenta TensorFlow is a Python library, and Magenta is also a Python library that was developed by Google AI. They've developed this particular library to do exactly what I'm stating to do: change analog sounds that you record through a phone or a computer, and make them into another form that's still music, but it's different. It's still usable. That's what Magenta does. Week 2, I was working on the UI, so I had to kind of dive into JavaScript and HTML and do more research on exactly how to do JavaScript, HTML, as well as further research on Magenta TensorFlow, because ultimately what I am doing with Magenta is I'm curating a lot of data. So they have milieu of data sets and things like that, music that you can use to sample, hundreds of gigabytes. But what Magenta does is they use recurrent neural networks to change sounds into something else. And then week 3, it's still working on my UI, and then back in development. So how does Tensor Magenta Flow work? We've covered a little bit of it. In short, it just takes analog sounds, makes them digital, changes them into something different. Now, here's my basic architecture. We've got and then before I go to the UI, I just want to cover this to make sure that it's very clear that we have a UI or HTML code, where we record a sound, and then that then we save that file and put it in the S3 bucket. In the S3 bucket, it triggers a Lambda function that takes it to Amazon SageMaker. Amazon SageMaker is where the Magenta TensorFlow libraries are being curated. And so they'll take as an input the sound that's recorded. What they will output after it goes to the neural networks developed by Magenta and TensorFlow is that output will trigger another Lambda function, which is now on step 5, and it will go back to the S3 bucket. And then from the S3 bucket, it will go back to HTML and pop up as a downloadable link for the user. This is ultimately a web application. Now that we've gone through that, let's go to the UI. So here's our UI. Very simple. I did not develop this UI. I'm curating this UI as well. Now, if we record something, it's just recording me talking at this moment. We hit stop. Clip. So we've got the clip. Now I could, some of my difficulties that came from this point was, how do I actually make this recorded clip of sound go through the back end? That issue was not fully resolved, but the architecture was. Had I more time, I could actually work it out and make it completely usable. But since that part is not completed, what we can do is I can demo it. So I go to developer tools, and then the recording we just had, take it to media. We have a blob file. Blob file we can click, and there's our blob file. And we can do with that blob file is we okay, and save audio as, call it the blob file. Boom. Got our blob file. Go to the S3 console. My whole backend was not developed, so I'll just show you brief working of it. Boom. Cool. So now we've got a blob file. That, as far as this functionality as I've been able to do, my difficulties included actually, I've gotten the Lambda function to trigger it to another S3 bucket, but not to SageMaker. I couldn't get it to actually operate on Magenta TensorFlow to trigger another Lambda function as I wanted it to. But if I had more time, I could put it all together.
So your architecture is in place. You just have to complete the pipeline development, just end to end.
Yes.
Right. So you got your output from Magenta working.
Yeah.
If it takes in the input, it generates the transmutated file. You got that working.
Mm-hmm.
Your input, which is HTML input, to S3, that's working. Now the last mile really is connecting those two pieces. You input to the model via Lambda function.
Yep.
Okay. Good job, then. You did well.
And then, so those were definitely my difficulties, was just making the whole back-end pipelining work, all the triggers working, and then to bring it back to the front end. But yeah, do you guys have any questions? Yes.
So what I gather from Magenta is that it's basically doing a remix of a song on its own. And I'm curious if there's options of the different types of remixes or transmutations that the user can input. That's something you might consider.
You could so yeah, you can test these models on your own way. So they come pre-trained, and you can train them with the music they have, which is a repository of classical music. You could definitely train these neural networks a different way to create, for example, a different genre of music with what you propose. That's feasible. That's totally doable. It's something that I propose doing forward. I think so. Yeah.
So what was your biggest learning moment? You could have more than one.
I guess I would say, honestly, the front end stuff, that was like, even though I curated a lot of data, I still had to learn how to apply it all. And so the HTML and the JavaScript, I had to find a way to make that work with my bucket. I had to find a way to make sure that the files end up going to my bucket. And that's all coding I had to learn on my own. Definitely all the backend stuff, learning how to trigger Lambda functions and learning the roles, the policies, how all that works with Lambda functions, that was new to me. I had to learn how to do all that. I had to learn how SageMaker worked, and that was a totally new skill set for me. Yeah, I mean, I've also learned that you can curate data to make products to test out ideas, and that's, I mean, I think that's very beneficial. That you can use. I mean, there's enough repositories out there to run a whole load of tests if you're interested in going a certain route, whether it be your own projects or if you're just curious. I learned that the possibilities are essentially endless in that regard. Yeah.
So if you had somebody help you out with the front end, you could have a product released, say 3 months from now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think probably shorter. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Do you have anything on Magenta, where the pointers are, where we can go and play around with Magenta? Is that GitHub? Where we go play, where can
Oh,
we?
where you can go play with Magenta. I mean, they have a whole repository, which I can post a link below. But there's a whole repository to go play with Magenta to run these networks on your own, train your own networks and things like that.
And would you be sharing any of this on GitHub?
Yes, definitely. I mean, you'll get credits everywhere. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for him? Okay. Thank you. Good job.
This conference will now be recorded.